below desert in beautiful Tempe, Arizona, and joining me from beautiful Kingman, Arizona. This is Politics and the Past with Robert Ferguson, and I am joined by my new co-host, Andrew Ritter, coming all the way again from Kingman, Arizona, though I think typically you'll be joining me more locally. Is that correct?
Yeah, that should be correct, although the current circumstances have confined me to Kingman, but yes.
All right. Well, definitely appreciate you jumping on. I hear that apparently they have Wi-Fi in Kingman. That's pretty good.
They do. They do. I was surprised when I got here too. I thought they were still using horse and buggy, but we're like in the 1990s-ish. We're only like 30 years behind. Oh, it's chill. It's not the worst.
That's good. You know what? I had Jack, Jack on a podcast last night, and he was staying at a friend's place, and that's what he was telling me. But I'm pretty sure he was doing the podcast from underneath an overpass. Uh, th- it's at least I can see that you are sheltered. That's a good start.
Yeah, yeah. Ideally, you want to be sheltered when you're doing this because you don't want like the outside. Which, if wait, when y'all were recording with Jack, was there just like if it was under an overpass, you just hear like a car going by
No,
like
no,
every
no,
five
no, no.
seconds? That's okay, okay.
He was in his friend's backyard. I was just making fun of him for being
Oh, okay, gotcha.
uh anyway, so Andrew is going to be joining us on a really regular basis now. He is an undergraduate at Arizona State University, is doing and doing a lot of the programming with the Center for American Institutions. Um, for those of you who listened to the earlier China and Taiwan episode, I encourage you to go back and listen to it. Andrew did a spectacular job in that episode and really, was very impressive with his deep knowledge of China, and just getting to know him in the week since, his knowledge on several things is really very impressive. So, anyway, we're glad to have you aboard, Andrew. And Andrew, tell people a little bit about yourself, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no, okay. So originally, I'm not from Arizona. I'm from New Mexico, and I consider that really my home state, but I live in Arizona now, and I go to Arizona State University. I just got done with my freshman year. Finals week was last week, which thank God that's over. But yeah, no, I guess I'm a sophomore now, which is kind of crazy to even hear it come out of my own mouth. But I'm majoring in international relations, and pretty soon I just put in my application. I'll be double majoring with that and Chinese through the Chinese flagship program. And I do work with Model United Nations at ASU, Politics and Leadership Club, Chinese flagship program, and lately the Center for American Institutions. But yeah, that's just basically what I focus on a little bit. But yeah, no, it's great to like be on more consistently, and I look forward to a lot of fun, productive episodes. But yeah,
Yeah, well, again, we're really happy to have you aboard. Jack is not disappearing, but he is going abroad. He is leaving from his
of
friend.
course.
He's leaving from his friend's backyard. He's going to be spending the next several months in Europe. And while you're going to be in Singapore coming up pretty soon, you're not going to be in Singapore for 6 months on end. So we're going to be able to. You're going to be there for what, a month?
Yeah, a month. I'll be there. I'll get there on the 7th and I leave on like the 11th.
Okay.
Although technically my flight leaves on the 5th, but yeah, just a month. Better than 6 months. I could not like I admire Jack for that. That's a big commitment.
It is.
That's
I
a
mean,
big
you know
commitment
what?
right
It
there.
suits him perfectly, though, I think. I think, he's going to do a couple months in Prague
For
and then
sure.
4 months in Florence. And he's going to come back with an accent and, all sorts of. I look forward to seeing how he's dressed when he comes back. It's going to be, it's going to be good for him. I look forward to it.
He'll be the first South Dakotan to know Italian.
Yeah, he might
I
be.
I, I think that'll be a world record. That might be it.
I'm pretty sure there, you know what? I do think there's probably a few other South Dakotans that have learned Italian over the years, but his Midwest accent is going to stand out in Florence. I can tell you that.
He'll be the first
Yeah.
with the Midwest. It'll be something. It'll be something. I don't know, but it'll be.
It'll be good.
I'm looking forward to it. I'm
It'll be
looking
good.
forward
It'll
to
be
it.
good for
Yeah.
him. But anyway, we appreciate you coming aboard, Andrew. One of the, you mentioned you were from New Mexico, and this is fortuitous because I've been really, this podcast is based in Arizona, We've done a few Arizona specific episodes. We've tried to cover several of the states, but a state that I'm going to be honest, I mean, I'm pretty new to Arizona. Um, I don't know that much about New Mexico, especially New Mexico politics. And so bringing you on board, my first question was, what do I need to know about New Mexico politics? And so
The first,
yeah,
oh
anyway,
my bad.
I'll say that. So anyway, I'm just really like, I'm, hoping we can do a bit of a deep dive into New Mexico. And again, like what's so, what's interesting about New Mexico politics and what people around the country, might benefit from knowing. So, Andrew, I'll turn the floor over to you. First and foremost, what is the most important thing people need to know about New Mexico politics?
I think like the first and foremost most important thing about New Mexico politics is that it's not the most consequential out of the nation. There's certainly states that their races are far more important for what happens across the country, but it's, I would argue, one of the most unique situations purely based off of demographics alone. It's a minority majority state, which means that like a minority group is the majority, but not even just that, proportionally has the most Native Americans, I think, out of any state. I don't know if it's tied with Alaska or, but it has a deep Native influence, and the history of New Mexico too plays a big role because before there were even any pilgrims on the East Coast in Massachusetts or English settlers in Jamestown, there were Spanish settlements in New Mexico in the Rio Grande Valley. I believe Santa Fe was established in, I think, 1603, which predates what, the Jamestown colony. And I'm not, unfortunately, my American history is not the best, but I think Jamestown was like what, 1607, 1611 or something like that.
Yeah,
So
I think it was
it,
16. Well, it depends on how you call it, but yeah, essentially.
yeah, but it predates English colonization of the mainland United States by a couple years. And so the most important thing is the interest groups. There's a strong native presence that I don't think that even a lot of New Mexicans talk about, that really gets overlooked whenever we talk about like New Mexico politics. There's I don't know how many, but there's like dozens of federally recognized tribes in New Mexico, and they're not called tribes, they're pueblos, which I think is very interesting. And there are the descendants of Spanish colonists who actually settled in the New Mexico area with like land decrees given by the King of Spain for centuries. And these families have just kind of grown over time. I know in my town of Moriarty, which is just some small little town right outside of Albuquerque, there's like the Anayas and there's like Martinez's, like Ramirez, like these families that go back 300 years to the founding of like New Mexico as a Spanish colony. And so these old families play a big role, the native tribes play a big role, and more recently, oil plays a big role, and movies too. A lot of your favorite movies, TV shows, they're in New Mexico. I mean, like one of the things we're known for, unfortunately, or fortunately, because I think it's a good show, but Breaking Bad, that came out of New Mexico, and there's a lot of other shows, movies that come out of New Mexico. They filmed a lot of Yellowstone, which I know I haven't watched it, but I know it's a big TV show. They filmed a lot of that in New Mexico, not even in Wyoming, but um the movie industry is big, the oil industry is big, but it's kind of a clash of these new forces like movies, oil, and AI more recently moving in with kind of the very traditional aspects of New Mexico, such as the Catholic Church has a very big presence because it used to be a Spanish colony. The native tribes, the old Nuevo Mexicano like families there, it's a dynamic I don't think any other state really has because New Mexico is just that old. And it gets overlooked because New Mexico is only a country, I mean, a state of 2 million people. And I hate to say it as a native New Mexico, and that we are overshadowed by everyone else. Like economically, we're behind. We're last in education, or a lot of states say they're last in education, but we're close to the bottom at least. And yeah, no, New Mexico's just not a lot of people know about it. I think if you ask the average person on the streets of New York, what do you know about New Mexico? They'll say like, again, Breaking Bad. But yeah, the demographics and the different interest groups. The interest groups, importantly, are the main um topic to be concerned with when we're talking about New Mexico politics.
Yeah, I think I really want to dig into this notion that you brought up, and I'd never considered it before because even I really I understood that Native Americans play maybe a larger role in state New Mexico politics than maybe they play as an interest group in any other state in the Union. Again, maybe with the exception of Alaska, but leaving the continental
Yeah.
48 anyway. But I knew nothing. I'd never known about these families. That of course it makes sense that they had these, charters going back to the Spanish crown. But these old Spanish landed gentry families, colonial families, of course they would still be around. And of course they would still have a significant amount of influence. I mean, in Virginia, you still have the the name of the family are for whatever reason escaping me, but the founding families of Virginia, the FFV, are still play a major role in Virginia society. And so it wouldn't, of course, you would have a similar dynamic in New Mexico with Spanish families. Um, and then, so this really interesting notion that you brought up, Andrew, of the very old and the very new, and they're encountering each other in New Mexico. It almost feels like a Western,
Yeah.
right? It almost,
It's and like that I didn't even think it is kind of like I have a funny story to bring up. I actually met the governor of New Mexico last year, and she comes from, again, like that old landed Spanish gentry, right? Michelle Lujan Grisham. And what we were talking about, we weren't really talking about a lot of like crazy economic stuff. We were talking about Star Trek. And she was talking about how, yeah, I bought a whole bunch of like the movie industry in New Mexico and stuff like that. When we talk about the encounters between the old and the new, they're not always hostile. I mean, here I am talking with probably, I don't know, a 13th generation New Mexican. And she's talking about, oh yeah, my favorite TV shows like Star Trek, and we've done a lot of work in space tourism and in the movie industry and bringing out. And I was just thinking, whoa, it's just such a interesting situation between like there's a common conception, and it's just because the way American politics is structured, that the old and the new are always in conflict. But in New Mexico, they're kind of, it's a synthesis. And that conversation right there, I think, just perfectly details it.
yeah, I think it does. It encapsulates the fact that just because when I say there's the old and the traditional, um, they're not necessarily hostile to modern forces, and they want to capture modern forces, but at the same time, they don't want to lose what they have, in which a lot of cases influence, right? And
Yeah.
so how do it's an old question in politics. How do you harness external dynamic forces without losing your internal, influence or power? I didn't know this that the current governor is even of one of these in the way of a Mexican families.
Yeah, no, she or like her I guess like roots, they're very deep in New Mexico, very deep.
Okay. Okay. And is that traditional? Have there been several like governors recently that are from these families, or is this kind of a coincidence?
I think I don't know if it's a coincidence. I think I did a little bit of research to kind of refresh up, and from what I've seen, a lot of the previous governors are, some of them aren't even like originally born in New Mexico. I think she's actually an anomaly. A lot of these old landed gentry families, they play more of a background role,
Right.
such as in like business, like they're like in ranching or stuff like that. Like they
Sure.
dominate ranching and like farming and stuff like that. But in terms of like the political level, I think she was the first to actually get to the governor level. But I might be wrong, but from my research, I like the past 6, 7 governors have been very like they just don't come from those circumstances.
Right. They may have deep roots in New Mexico, but their generation is the first one with deep roots in New Mexico. It's not
Exactly.
that
Yeah.
ancient,
Yeah.
traditional, almost spiritual connection to the state. Um, so Andrew, uh, again, this is purely me not knowing a whole bunch about New Mexico politics. I really don't. I mean, I would honestly probably say to you that despite living in Arizona, and I've only lived here for just the better part of a year now, but if I was to list the states that I understand the dynamics of their internal politics, New Mexico might be the lowest one. Like I have probably the worst handle on anything that happens in New Mexico. So everything you tell me today is basically going to be brand new to me. But I do know that the Democratic Party seems to have a pretty strong hold on New Mexico. Is that an accurate statement, or are the Republicans a pretty like are they able to wielding influence too?
I think it's interesting that, and this is a dynamic that kind of plays across the rest of the nation, where the Democrat Party has a big stronghold over like the major urban areas like Las Cruces, Albuquerque, Santa Fe, but outside of that, the Republican Party kind of dominates the rest of the state. But it's a weird dynamic where typically New Mexico votes Democrat in like national elections. Like they voted Democrat in 2012. I mean, I think the last time they voted Republican in a presidential election was 2004. They've been voting Democrat for a while, but it's weird because on the state level, there's always like a weird toss-up where it's like a Republican governor one term and then Democrat, then Republican, then Democrat, then Republican, and it's been going back to the 1980s.
Hmm.
But I think the current circumstances, I don't know, and I say this with not a lot of bias because I'm part of the, I guess, like Republican Party of New Mexico, but I don't think the Republicans have a shot of winning this election. I just think that their outreach is weak and they don't do as much as the Democrat Party does. They're like, and it does not even come down to a partisan line. I think both have had their problems governing, whether it was Gary Johnson from 1995 to 2003, or currently Michelle Lujan Grisham right now. There's just certain systemic problems that supersede both parties. And so I think the Democrats will probably win this election just because within the last couple of years they've really consolidated power. Like I'm pretty yeah, no, in 2024 for the Senate race, um the Democratic nominee for the Senate like eclipsed the Republican nominee by 12%. It wasn't even close. And I've been looking at polling and it looks to be the same thing. The thing is that the Republican Party of New Mexico does not have a clear, I guess, goal of who they want to nominate. The Democrats right now are currently split between Deb Haaland, who's kind of the more establishment backed by the governor herself and the national and a lot of state level officials, and this guy named, let me pull up my notes, but this guy named Greg. Wait, no. Sam Bregman, he's the mayor of, wait, no, he's not the mayor. He's the district attorney for Bernalillo County, and he's been backed by a lot of like labor unions and stuff like that. So we're kind of seeing within the Democratic Party kind of a clash between the establishment and kind of a more populist candidate. But the Republicans are all over the place. The Democrats only have two nominees, the Republicans have three, and they're all vying for control. So that race, I think, could go anyway. It's kind of chaotic.
Interesting. Um, so you mentioned that the Democrats have historically in the state controlled, the urban areas. And I mean, I must say, even though, calling Las Cruces an urban area is
It's a bit of a stretch, but in New Mexico,
it counts.
compared to like a village of like 100 people, it
It counts
counts.
for sure. Albuquerque and Santa Fe are, clearly urban areas,
Yeah.
and would qualify nationally for that. But the what's the Democratic Party's position, or like, are Native Americans uniquely like are they all going with the Democratic Party, or is there a split among Native Americans in the state? How does that work?
I think that's an interesting question because there is a split. There are what I would say are kind of two main groups of Native Americans, and I don't want to make a
I
generalization,
understand.
but the way there's two different classifications, I would say. There are tribes, like reservations, tribes, like nations, and then there's pueblos, which are very small, localized native groups. And the pueblos, they live basically along the entire Rio Grande area, with some exceptions like Taos in the mountains of like the far north. But then there's the tribes or like the nations, like Navajo Nation takes up basically almost that entire northwestern section of New Mexico, or some of the Apache tribes in like southeastern New Mexico. But I think from what I've seen, the Navajo Nation is very unique in the fact that I'm pretty sure they had a Republican lieutenant governor, and it's more split. It's more 50-50 in Republican and Democrat. The Pueblos, they've been beneficiaries of kind of the current Democratic or the Democrat control over the state, so they tend to vote Democrat. The Democrat Party's platform in New Mexico is to not limited to the national platform, but it's also just to what's it called again? Ensure that the natives have like exclusive rights. Like casinos are a big thing. That's they control a lot of casinos. But yeah, no, the Pueblos tend to vote more Democrat, but the tribes or the nations, like the Navajo Nation, some of the Apache tribes, they're more 50-50. They're more split, especially considering the a lot of the Apache tribes in the southeast are near the Permian Basin, which is where a lot of oil is extracted. So they do tend to shift a little bit to the right.
Interesting, very interesting. And you know what? This makes me think that at some point we need to have a podcast and a discussion just about partisan politics in Native communities.
For
I
sure,
mean, I
for
think that
sure.
would be absolutely fascinating. Um, you mentioned earlier that there are some systemic and structural problems in New Mexico that neither Republican Party nor Democratic Party leadership have been able to resolve. Can you talk a little bit about what some of those problems are?
The Let me think. The biggest issue I would say is crime. It if you Albuquerque is notoriously known for having a very bad crime issue. It ranks consistently in like the top 50 of like the most dangerous cities in America. Crime's a big issue that both parties have not really been able to tackle, and healthcare, interestingly enough, because New Mexico is, and this goes all the way back to the 1940s with like the nuclear testing at like Los Alamos. There, compared to the rest of the nation, New Mexico has significantly higher radiation levels. It's not abnormal, but they're higher, and that plays a role in healthcare outcomes, especially in like native communities, because um like a lot of the times with nuclear testing, a lot of this nuclear waste would be just stored in the middle of the desert, and there's not a lot of people that live in the desert, but there are some native tribes that do live in the desert, and so some of that exposure to like radiation does play a role, which is weird because New Mexico technically ranks at the bottom for cancer rates, like the least cancer in the country, but there is certainly elevated cancer risks like among like native communities and stuff like that. And yeah, no, healthcare is probably the biggest issue, but because the drug issue is just a massive issue, especially considering our proximity to the Mexican border. Since we border Mexico, some of the border security measures there are a little bit
Yeah.
sketchy to say the least. And so, it's actually a funny story because the day I was going to New Mexico, there's this little community just south of where I used to live called uh McLeod. And there was a raid on this racetrack that was owned by the cartel, and my mom was showing me this video on Facebook of like hundreds or like tens of government vehicles just going to raid this thing. So there is a cartel presence which does introduce drugs into the area, and this also ties into crime too, because when we look at recidivism, a lot of the people that go into prison, they go on drug issues, and the drug issues only exacerbates the healthcare issue. But then once these people get out of prison, the drugs and the economic issue too. It only exacerbates problems, and we see like New Mexico has one of the highest recidivism rates in the entire country. So there's a feedback loop between healthcare and crime where they both kind of feed each other, where crime leads to drugs and all this stuff, which helps lead to worse healthcare outcomes, and then the healthcare outcomes help lead to more crime. It's kind of interesting. And then the economy plays a role too, where it's just compared to every other neighbor of New Mexico, New Mexico's just been left behind. There's just not much investment. And I think you can chop that down to education's not that good. We ran close to the bottom in terms of education, so there's not a lot of skilled labor and resources too. We're a very water scarce place. I mean, the Rio Grande's been in a drought for I don't know, like 2 decades now or something. So it's a population issue, a drought issue, education issue. It's New Mexico's got a lot of issues, but I would chop it down because I know it's getting all convoluted. But healthcare, crime, and
The economy.
economy,
Yeah.
which yeah, and the economy, yeah,
Well, and that speaks to, New Mexico's not alone in the sense that there are some states that have obvious urban areas that are that are dynamic places economically. And most states don't actually have those places. And New Mexico is one of the ones that doesn't. I mean, I don't mean any slight
yeah,
against Albuquerque or Santa Fe. They're lovely places. I mean, I take your point on crime. I spent one night downtown Albuquerque, and I don't intend to do that again. Um,
yeah,
having lived downtown Atlanta and wandering around downtown Atlanta, I don't think I'm particularly, a nervous person in those sorts of environments. But, Albuquerque, I certainly got my guard up a little bit wandering around.
yeah,
Um, but so the crime thing, Albuquerque is a lovely city. It's in a lovely location. I mean, but it's not easily connected to other places. It's a long way from the Pacific coast. It's near El Paso and it's not that far, I guess, from El Paso and Texas. It's a long way and a difficult way. You've got mountains, you've got desert, you've got all these geographic hurdles to connecting these various places. So, and then you mentioned it's water scarce. Certainly there's minerals and that kind of thing, but it's a challenging place for economic development and for sustainable long-term prosperity. And that's why I guess you're going to have people that are like, the governor of New Mexico, this interesting fusion of the old and the new, where you need the new in order to develop the economy, right?
yeah, for sure, for
And
sure.
uh, and then the fact is that native tribes and native communities, I mean, have there's a bunch of structural issues there that not and it's not a condescending thing to say that I think they would recognize that there's a lot of health and you know health and wealth issues there. And so, yeah, I mean, it strikes me as a very difficult state to govern.
It's yeah, it is. It's just like, and again, the biggest issue resources like climate, geography, and demographics is the biggest issue. The Rio Grande, the best way I like to look at it, it's like the Nile River of New Mexico. It goes directly through New Mexico. It starts in Colorado, and then I mean, it goes all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. But through the area it goes through New Mexico, it's just dry, and it didn't used to be like that. And again, for centuries, that's why Spanish colonization in New Mexico was even possible. That's why it wasn't like there were Spanish outposts in Arizona, even Colorado, Utah, and California, but they weren't that sustainable because there was not a lot of access to water. But New Mexico actually had large scale habitation, especially in Santa Fe, because of access to the Rio Grande. But because of the Rio Grande just being so dry for the past like couple decades, that's what's just prohibited economic growth. And what the past couple governors have been doing is they've been, I guess, shifting economic growth away from like I guess resource extraction like oil and stuff like that and stuff that would put economic strain on the environment and more towards services. I mentioned before how New Mexico has a big movie scene, and that's true. There's also a space tourism scene. I forgot if it was I think it was like Virgin Galactic, and I forgot who owns that, but Virgin Galactic seeks to
Richard Branson.
build like a space. Yeah, Richard Branson, of all people, just wants to build like a space tourism hub in New Mexico because New Mexico is very good for astronomy. It's got some of the clearest skies in the country because, again, there's just not a lot of people, not a lot of light pollution. So we're seeing a shift away from resource extraction and kind of like industrial output and even a lot of like traditional stuff like agricultural stuff and more towards a service-based economy.
Interesting. I mean, you know what? I mean, I actually am not surprised that Richard Branson would want to develop a space tourism industry in New Mexico. In the movie, the fact is that New Mexico has mystique. It's this place
It
that I
does.
think, again, I can't pretend to know very much about it. But when I think of New Mexico, I sort of have some romantic notions in my head about the place that doesn't exist, sorry, Jack, when I think of South Dakota.
It's I mean, first of all, the name alone, New Mexico, it just like, well, it's like Mexico. But then, especially if you like actually, it depends on where you go. But like when people go to New Mexico, they'll go to Albuquerque, Santa Fe, despite all the problems that Albuquerque has. Like you said, it's in a beautiful place. It's right next to the Sandia Mountains. In Santa Fe, it's 400 years old and it has so much history. And just the fact that New Mexico is the amalgamation of Spanish, Mexican, Native, and Anglo cultures all rolled up into one. And it's 6,000 feet above sea level. It's high. I like to think of it kind of like the Tibet of America. That's a very bad analogy, I think, but it's like that kind of mystique that mystery Tibet has. New Mexico carries some of that, I feel like. It's just, and again, it's not cut off, but it's harder to get to than to say just flying into Phoenix or something
Oh
like
yeah,
that.
it's not
That's
you.
what adds to it. And New Mexico plays off of that too,
Yeah.
especially with our tourism industry.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say there's a reason your slogan is Land of Enchantment, right?
Yeah.
I think that's the slogan, right? Or am I confusing it with another slogan?
Land of enchantment, but a lot of locals call it the land of entrapment.
Fair enough.
Again, that goes down to the
Well,
economic issues,
well,
but
here's the thing.
there's something about it.
No, here's the thing. I mean, I think again, we all have this notion in our heads of, maybe people who don't, not all, but people who think of New Mexico, and aside from Breaking Bad, but to get to New Mexico, you have to want to go to New Mexico. I mean, unless you're
Yeah,
traveling
for sure.
I-40, like, that's the only time people who are not necessarily looking to go to New Mexico go through New Mexico.
Yeah.
But otherwise, you gotta want to go there. Um, and it's but what I do see here in Phoenix is a lot of people from New Mexico who have moved here for better economic opportunities.
I
And
mean, yeah, yeah.
it strikes me as like your land of entrapment point makes a lot of sense. It's a lot of people, a lot of young people at least they moved away from New Mexico and I don't mean this as a slight on the state, they're grateful they have because they know there's just way more economic opportunity here in Arizona than there is in New Mexico. And this is again one of the great challenges that New Mexico faces is how do you how do you economically develop and create this sustainable long-term place that these young people who moved to Arizona, they don't want to move to Arizona, they want to stay in New Mexico.
Yeah, it's and what you said, oh, like just like what you just said right there about like young people moving to Arizona for better economic opportunities is literally perfect. If there's ever a video version of this podcast, I am literally recording in a room, and if I tilt up my laptop, there's just my mattress. I just moved to Arizona. My laptop, which I'm recording on this or talking on this on, is on top of a box. And there's whenever I'm driving around ASU, driving around Tempe, I see a weird amount of New Mexico plates. And I think the reason a lot of people like from New Mexico move to Arizona, specifically Arizona, it's somewhat similar to New Mexico in terms of climate, but it it almost seems like it's kind of like New Mexico if it was, and again, I don't even want to slight my own state, but if it was something went right for it. Something went right in Arizona that didn't go right for New Mexico because it's like in a lot of ways, I mean, ignoring because I think the native dynamics in Arizona, and I'm not as much of an expert on Arizona as I am on New Mexico, but they're less important than I would say they are in New Mexico. But climate-wise, again, Arizona's a desert. It's a dry state, but yet somehow it's succeeded where New Mexico's failed in a lot of aspects. And the biggest thing that New Mexicans need to realize, and a lot of New Mexicans do realize, like when you look at polling, like again, the big three, four issues: healthcare, crime, the economy. Yeah, it's like everything that Arizona has, just New Mexico doesn't. And a lot of young people recognize that, which is why I think a lot of young people are leaving the state. But the reason a lot of people, like myself, I still call New Mexico home. I have a New Mexico flag hanging up right there, not on the screen. The culture. It's the culture. And I think the culture is can what it'll save New Mexico in the end of the day. If we can promote the culture as our highlight, in a way, I think that's probably one of the only things New Mexico and Hawaii have in common is Hawaii, a lot of their economy is just based off of, tourism and showing off their culture. If New Mexico can do that, because they do a good job, and New Mexico's still doing a good job, and but they're still in the process of fully developing it. And it's worked. It's worked. I think the movie industry has brought like hundreds of millions of dollars of
Sure.
revenue to New Mexico. So if they keep capitalizing on that, they can do that. But it all goes down to a broader systemic issue of, again, crime, education, the economy. For people that aren't involved in the tourism industry, for just the average Joe, living in New Mexico just kind of sucks. Like in Albuquerque, it has some of the highest carjacking rates in the entire country. I think it's definitely top 10 in the entire country. And
I don't valet my car very often.
yeah,
I valeted it downtown Albuquerque.
I wouldn't blame you. And I hope the valet probably had something on him. And he probably did have something on him too to protect himself. It gets crazy in downtown Albuquerque, but it's like you can only go so far off of tourism.
Mhm.
It also needs to be a good place to live. And that's where New Mexico needs to work on.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And I want to, everything that we're saying right now, people who live in New Mexico, it's not intended to be, uh, you know, pejorative
Yeah.
in any sense. A place that I am deeply fond of and love is Nova Scotia, a province in Canada. And your point, Andrew, when you said New Mexico is to Arizona, Arizona is to New Mexico, to people who live in New Mexico, it's like, what happened if something went right?
Yeah.
And I know in places like Nova Scotia, and that they look at a province like Alberta and they say, everything we try doesn't seem to work.
Yeah.
Well, you guys tried something that worked. And it's that there it breeds animosity, it breeds all of these maybe envy, all sorts of things. But there is this look at this feeling like, what if something went right for a change? And so I am familiar with that. And again, we don't mean it pejoratively. We're trying to understand the dynamics that are at play in a state like New Mexico. Okay, so can you tell me a little bit? You mentioned earlier that the Republican Party of New Mexico doesn't really know what it wants to be. Can you
Yeah.
touch on that a little bit?
The most important thing to understand about the New Mexico Republican Party is that there's really two camps. There's kind of the camp that's more trying to catch up with the national Republican movement of like Trump and MAGA and all that. But then there's I think this is the majority camp. The majority of the New Mexico Republican Party is libertarian, really. Gary Johnson, who's a very, I think, especially in 2016 when he tried running for president on the libertarian ticket, he used to be the governor of New Mexico from 1995 to 2003, and he ran as a Republican, and he kind of defined what it meant to be a New Mexico Republican. And so the dominant camp in New Mexico is basically libertarianism with some socially conservative ideas. And you can see this reflective when you look at the campaign websites for all of the Republican nominees running. I mean, the one of the runner-ups for the nominee for Republican governor is this guy named I think it's Duke Rodriguez. And I don't know if you could get away with this being a Republican in a lot of other states, but this guy is the CEO of one of the largest like marijuana companies in the entire state. And I think that just goes to show how libertarian the Republican Party in New Mexico has become. And you kind of have to be like that because, again, a lot of New Mexico is just extremely rural. And so, kind of that, some of those libertarian values speak to a large portion of like New Mexicans, and so it would make sense for the Republican Party of New Mexico to kind of campaign off of that. But there's the fight between the libertarian camp and the camp trying to catch up to the national party, and the national party camp is losing. The libertarians are gonna keep, they're probably gonna keep running, and I don't know. And they've had limited success. I'm not gonna say they've completely failed, but they've fallen short of taking control of the state. I'm pretty sure the Democrats have a supermajority in both the House and the Senate, just because of how district maps are created. They are gerrymandered.
Mm.
It's just it's just hard for the Republicans to even gain a foothold.
Right. Well, I mean, anyway, I was just looking at Duke Rodriguez's site, and it is very different from a lot of
Yeah.
Republican sites that you would see around the country. Um, and yeah, that's interesting. I mean, Gary Johnson, you're right, ran in 2016. He got absolutely, in my opinion, unfairly criticized for the Aleppo comment. And that kind of doomed his campaign. He basically didn't
Yeah.
hear somebody and said, "I'm sorry, what are you talking about?" And then it became a meme that he didn't know where Syria about anything about Syria. And maybe he didn't know anything about Syria, but it was he was unfairly vilified for that. But yeah, he was very famous, probably the most famous libertarian Republican.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean,
For
maybe
sure.
Ron Paul would have been more broadly famous, but Gary Johnson was actually an executive.
Yeah. And within the context of New Mexico, no, like nobody is in the picture except for Gary Johnson. He's and there's been Republican governors since Gary Johnson, but a lot of them have had like corruption scandals and stuff like that. But Gary Johnson is the template. He's the model for the New Mexico
Well,
Republican.
Duke Rodriguez brought, I mean, again, I just glanced at it and I saw Gary Johnson's name twice on
Yeah.
Duke Rodriguez's site.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure he was let me check.
He was
He
Health Human
was
Services Secretary.
human yeah, he was in the Human Services Department
Yeah.
secretary under Gary
Yeah,
Johnson.
right. Emphasizes it,
Yeah.
right? And that's really interesting. And you know what? I don't know that that dynamic exists anywhere else in the country anymore. That's an older dynamic, that kind of
For
libertarian
sure.
Republican versus the what used to be called movement Republicans. But the movement Republicans were taken over by the MAGA movement, essentially.
Yeah.
And, so most of the dynamics in the country within the Republican Party are movement Republicans versus MAGA Republicans. The fact that New Mexico still has has a dominant libertarian wing is really unique.
Yeah, for
And I
sure.
think that speaks to not only, Gary Johnson's legacy. I think generally New Mexicans, I mean, I'm sure there's lots of New Mexicans, lots of bad things to say about Gary Johnson, but he generally, I think people think well of him, of his governorship.
I think like it just comes down to partisan
Sure.
politics. It's mixed. Just depending on who you ask, people will love Gary Johnson, and then other people are gonna hate Gary
Sure.
Johnson. I think it's not that it's like his legacy was good or bad, but it was definitely heavily influential because again, like he ran as kind of like a standard run-of-the-mill Republican, but he really became more libertarian as time went on. He
Right.
changed his like viewpoint on like abortion, the death penalty. Well, I think the last execution in New Mexico occurred like during like his run as governor. But yeah, he kind of again, he's just a monumental figure in New Mexican
Interesting.
politics, especially because he actually was one of the few people that got to the national level of just American politics in general. And although,
Well, Bill Richardson.
again, like you said, he unfairly got, I mean, Bill Richardson, but I think Gary Johnson just also with the rise of the internet, there's this one meme of like I think it was like 2016 libertarian like primaries, and Gary Johnson was the only guy that actually was for a driver's license, and that became a big thing that just kind of helped. And just his name too, Gary Johnson, kind of an easy name to remember.
I mean, it's the most like bait. Like if I was gonna, if Gary Johnson had never existed, and I was gonna write a movie, and I needed to have somebody be president, like, and I was gonna just write a character name for this person, and like they weren't gonna be it, like maybe they weren't even an important character, but like I just needed a name for a president. Gary Johnson is the sort of name I would give to a president. Like,
Yeah, it just gives off Chat GPT
yeah,
generate me a
right,
presidential
exactly.
name.
Anyway, that's really interesting. So is the um is the libertarian movement in the Republican Party, does that tend to be concentrated in the cities?
In the cities, I think that minority camp of like the MAGA movement, I think they're dominant in the cities. The libertarian movement is concentrated in the countryside,
Interesting.
really. And it's weird too because libertarians, I think, out of like most states, they do get a higher proportion of votes as compared to what's it called again, like any other state, which does kind of buy into Republican numbers because again, both of the platforms are strikingly similar, although the libertarians get a little bit more radical because they are the libertarian party, but the MAGA movement's really only confined to certain like cities and college campuses where it's actually connected with the rest of the country. And that's a recurring theme too. And if we talk about the Democrat side too, again, New Mexico politics is just almost like 20, 30 years behind the rest of the
Hmm.
country, where even the Democrat side too is still kind of old.
Hmm.
But like the emerging like MAGA movement, and even on the Democrat side with like the rise of like left wing populism and stuff like that, it's in the cities mostly.
Hmm.
It's concentrated in the cities, but even on the Democrat side, it's still a minority. But the MAGA movement, it's mostly in the cities, I would say, because it's nationally connected to the rest of the country.
That's really interesting. That's like the opposite of what I would assume.
Yeah,
Like, because typically, and again, this is, and this is why we need to do these state level deep dives because every state is a little bit different and has their own little flavor on things. But typically, if you're going to find like a continuing Republican libertarian community, it's going to be the professional class, right?
yeah,
You're going to have a few lawyers, a few business people, and that kind of thing that kind of continue that tradition. Whereas in the countryside, it tends to be more populist, more Republican populist. Um, and that's because typically I look at the Republican libertarian camp as sort of an elite camp. It's typically consists of elites as opposed to the more populist movements. Um, Again, Ron Paul ran a very populist libertarian campaign. I understand that, but a lot of the people that followed Ron Paul went into the MAGA movement because they followed the populism, right? But they weren't really part of that pre-existing libertarian, more elite infrastructure that is the type that Gary Johnson was part of, frankly. That continued on after Ron Paul, but like in with people like Paul Ryan, for instance, at the national level. But and maybe Governor Scott Walker of Wisconsin might be kind of an odd example, but kind of in that world.
yeah.
So that's really interesting. And but it kind of makes sense if you live in the countryside, especially you live in a hostile climate like New Mexico is, right? Um, what you could accomplish with your own two hands. There's sort of a Ron Swansonite libertarian, vibe that you could imagine ethos that you can imagine being pretty popular.
And economically too, one of the only major, I guess, developments economically outside of all of the service industries has been the marijuana
Hmm.
industry. And the only reason that even got through is I think that was something. And again, it goes down to those two camps fighting, but there were a significant number of Republicans that actually voted with a lot of Democrats to legalize marijuana in New Mexico. And that's been one of the only major developments outside of the service industry, and I think that's further promoted some of the ethos, just the general ethos and vibe of libertarianism, because I mean, it makes a lot of money. It
Yeah.
makes a lot of money
When
in New
marijuana becomes
Mexico.
when marijuana becomes an industry, all of a sudden your Chamber of Commerce Republicans are going to support it,
Yeah,
right? And are
yeah,
gonna
exactly.
and are going to support policies that promote that. So that's really, really interesting. All right. That's really fascinating. We're clearly going to have to do several episodes on New Mexico now because now I'm hooked. This is so cool. Um, Now let's talk about the Democratic Party here briefly. You mentioned that the left-wing populism tends to be concentrated in the cities. That's not a surprise. That's
Yeah.
where left-wing populism is more common. Um, what of the like I think of Las Cruces as feels like a college town to me. Is it a college? I mean, because that's where New Mexico State is, so I think of it as a college
Yeah, it
town,
has
but
New Mexico. It has New Mexico State, and not like I know some people that go to New Mexico State. That's kind of one of the. I mean, I guess it's like it's a it's a hub. I guess if you want to go down to El Paso or you want to get on like I-10 to go to like Phoenix or something. But yeah, it's a college town. That's just what it's known as,
right.
basically.
And so I mean
But yeah,
that would seem to be even though it's an ag school in a lot of ways, which kind of plays against, again, kind of has a uh sometimes a mediating influence on on left-wing radicalism at least. Or a
yeah.
both a mitigating influence on it. But um what do you think the prospects are for left-wing populism in the New Mexico Democratic Party?
I think we need to look up north because I think New Mexico State compared to UNM in
Sure.
Albuquerque, it's not really it's just more neutral. And Las Cruces is again, it's more dependent on agriculture. It's not necessarily a Republican city, but it leans more towards that way than Albuquerque, for
Sure,
example. That's not to say
it's
it is
also in
Republican.
in some ways a suburb of El Paso, which is a
Yeah,
pretty
I
right-wing
mean
place,
basically.
right?
Yeah. But the main hotspots of left-wing populism, they're in Albuquerque because Albuquerque, for all of the problems that it has, does actually have a relatively nascent, rich, or no, nascent's not the right word, but it does have a pretty big upper class. And UNM, their main focus is in kind of like somewhat arts to a certain degree, but like arts, and they have a pretty decent political science program. And I'm not saying all that breeds, like radical, like radical left wing populists, but it does create the conditions, I would say, because it's more connected to the rest of the country just by nature of UNM being there, and it's the bigger of the New Mexico like university system. So being more connected to the rest of the country politically, and just the fact that there's just people with more money there. Like a lot of people that I was in this program called Youth in Government, and everyone that I was with, like I came from a dinky public school in the middle of rural New Mexico, but I competed with people from all these private schools. There's a real wealth divide, and I think that wealth divide contributes to left-wing populism in Albuquerque because there's a lot of rich people, especially on the people that live on the east side, like next to the mountain, that creates a sort of friction with, again, people that just live around Albuquerque, these rural, libertarian-ish Republicans, and then even within the left, like even within the left itself, with kind of like the more mainstream moderate Democrats, which kind of they're more up towards like Santa Fe area because that's just where like a lot of the power is
Well,
because
it's the
Santa Fe is the
capital.
capital of New Mexico. Yeah, it's the capital, and so it's just it creates that friction. And with UNM just being connected, so kind of providing the communication and being a spot to actually like transmit what the rest of the country is doing, I think that's where that left-wing populism begins to stem from a little
Interesting.
bit.
Well, I mean, I think it makes sense that in a city that, again, and I recognize this too. I have not spent a lot of time in Albuquerque. I want to be very clear here.
Yeah.
So, but I think I'm an observant guy, and crime issues aside, you could see there is an inequality there, and it's striking,
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
It's striking, and it's not the only place I've seen that in the world. It's not the most inequality I've ever seen by any stretch of the
Yeah.
imagination, but it is striking. And so you can imagine, given especially this left wing moment, populist left wing moment, when the emphasis is on the billionaires, and I would be shocked if there's that many billionaires in and around Albuquerque. But there might be a lot of people with there might be a lot of millionaires, but I suspect there aren't that many billionaires if there's any at all. If there are billionaires in the state, they're probably further north, I would think.
There are some in Santa Fe, but I don't think there's any in Albuquerque.
There might be one or two, but it
Yeah,
wouldn't
one
be,
or two.
but it wouldn't be a lot. And
Yeah.
Albuquerque strikes me as the sort of place that if I'm a billionaire, I'm probably avoiding.
Yeah.
And again, that's not necessarily, that sounds pejorative. It's not necessarily what I'm, it's the reason being that if you're a billionaire, it means that you're actually going to stand out in a place like Albuquerque, and you don't really, I guess some billionaires want to stand out, but if I'm a billionaire, the last thing I want to do is stand out.
Yeah.
Because I think there's danger in that. But Albuquerque, and Albuquerque, like, it's a cool place. It's hip. There's lots of cool
Yeah.
stuff going on. So there's a great arts community, as you mentioned. UNM does a tremendous art school. I didn't know that, but I'm not surprised. Like, art in New Mexico is huge, right?
Yeah.
Just
No,
look
for sure.
look
Like
at it,
that's one of the things. Yeah.
right? So it's not a surprise that you're going to have an artistic cultural community. You're going to have a radical community that follows that. Um, but the question is, are they able to overwhelm the establishment Democrats?
And that's gonna be what the biggest fight is in the Democrat Party right now because the two contenders is I keep forgetting his name. Again, it's just one of those
Bregman.
like chat
You mentioned
GPT
Bregman.
generate me. Yeah, Bregman's. Yeah, so Bregman and Holland. And Bregman, he's not explicitly like a left-wing populist. If you look at his campaign website, I think it's run of the mill, but I think in comparison to his opponent, Deb Holland, she is like the mainstream candidate. But like, if you even look at the endorsements for Bregman, he's like his main support base is like the labor unions and stuff like that. And so I guess when we talk about left-wing populism, I don't think it's as much of like, and there's some new influences, but I guess it's like the more classical like left-wing populism, like the labor unions, like like the
Mhm.
workers. And then in comparison to Deb Holland, who I will give her one thing. I love the website design, but if you look at the endorsements, she does a great job at making you feel overwhelmed. Even if you begin to look at some of the people and say, who is that? Like, I feel like at a certain point they just started putting random people, but she has the support of basically all of like the U.S. New Mexico representatives, all of the U.S. like senators for New Mexico. Um, I heard a story, but I don't think she has put this on her website, but I'm 99% sure that Michelle Lujan Grisham, the current governor, has basically de facto endorsed her. And she also just like she's literally a mainstream like in the party because she served as U.S. Secretary of Interior under Joe Biden from 2021
Right.
to 2025. I don't think that's something people talk about a lot. She was the first like Native American to be in that position of power, which I think is very interesting. And so she's brought a lot of like DC expertise and just that general ethos back to New Mexico. And again, the support base in the New Mexico Democrat Party, it's weird because kind of like that new and old forces, it comes from like the new forces of a lot of people that have moved to Albuquerque, and especially because a lot of federal jobs are in New Mexico, like Sandia Labs, Los Alamos,
Yeah,
White
I was
Sands
actually going
Missile
to ask
Testing
about that.
Range.
We're kind of running out of time, so I wasn't going to spend much time on that. I decided not to spend much time on that, but that was a question I had. Was it with all these
It's a
moves were,
factor.
yeah.
Yeah, but so like kind of like this new money coming in. So and a lot of them do end up going into the left camp. But then again, these old families, a lot of the pueblos, they also support the Democrat Party, but for different reasons. And
Right.
so there's kind of a clash. But the old faction, the pueblos, the old families, they're just so entrenched. It's gonna be hard to displace them, especially because Deb Haaland, she comes from one of these like pueblos. She's from I forgot which one it was, but she's from one of the pueblos, and so she's gonna have a lot of support from that side of the
Right.
party. And so I think what'll end up happening is Bregman gets kicked out. Well, not kicked out, but like he'll lose the primaries, and Holland will basically become the Democrat nominee. And then at that point, I don't know if the Republicans even have a chance because
Sure.
they're just in complete chaos right now. But yeah,
Interesting. Again, I'm just kind of looking at the websites here of the two of them. I mean, Bregman's website's Amateur Hour. I kind of like it.
yeah,
Kind of dig it. I like Amateur Hour, but it's Amateur Hour. Deb Holland's very professional, very slick, very polished. What you would expect from the way that you've explained it. Interestingly, Bregman didn't come across as like he doesn't come across like Graham Plattner. He doesn't come across like some of the other left wing populists, just by briefly, taking a glimpse at the site. He mentions his, endorsements from labor unions. He but he talks a lot about things like strong borders on the
yeah,
site. He talks a lot about things like uh, you know, he talks about affordability in a not ma'am Danny sort of way of talking about affordability,
yeah.
right? It's sort of old fashioned the way that he's talking about affordability. And so that which is again interesting. He's You could tell he's running a left-wing populist campaign, but it's not a radical left-wing populist campaign.
Exactly. And that's what's fascinating. And again, it just goes back to that trend of New Mexico's like 30 years
There's
behind
no
the rest of
there doesn't
the
seem to be
country.
much radicalism in any of this at all.
Exactly. And that's like the weird thing too. And like there's certain like the radicalism on like the left wing, like it's really only confined to maybe like UNM and some of these like private schools.
Right.
But you can't you like that's just like there's not enough of a base to actually run a campaign off of it. It's
Sure.
impossible.
So like AOC is not having an effect in New Mexico, or doesn't seem to be.
No, not at all. Not at all.
That's
No.
interesting. So
Yeah.
AOC is not having an effect in New Mexico, and neither is, I mean, Donald Trump's obviously having an effect, but you're not seeing like I'm trying to think of sort of the avatar who's not Trump of sort of the extreme or of kind of the strident MAGA figure at the national level. Um, you know,
Like a Marjorie Taylor
Marjorie
Greene.
Taylor Greene, good example. Okay,
Yeah.
there's no Marjorie Taylor Greene either. And that's
Yeah.
really interesting. You might be right. It's 30 years behind the rest of the country. I mean, I wasn't going to doubt you on that, but
Yeah.
it's seems 30 years behind, or maybe we'll all end up back there, and New Mexico will just never have had to shift.
Well, by the time that we end up back there, New Mexico is gonna have their own Trumps and Mamdanis, and they'll be having a revolution or something,
Oh,
and then the rest of the country will be back
well,
to normal.
and I just wonder what it is that has sort of kept that odd stability. It's not stability, it's something else. What has allowed that to happen? What are the like there feels like there's something structural that has kept that from happening, because even if we look at South Dakota, right? Jack's home state, which is it's connected to the rest of the country, but it's a pretty isolated state like New Mexico is.
It's kind of out of the way,
Yeah.
yeah.
And yet, I mean, it's dominated by the Republican Party. But if you look at the Republican Party, it's movement Republicans versus MAGA Republicans, which is what I would expect to
Yeah.
see. And yet, New Mexico is Libertarian Republicans. And the Democrats, the left wing populist, is out there in a Stetson talking about secure borders and like bragging about his endorsement from the Albuquerque Police Association. Not exactly Mandani.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. And, Deb Holland, just looking at her site, I'm sure, establishment Democrat, I'm sure she has some left wing social ideas that, heck, I mean, it sounds like the Republicans have some left wing social ideas in New Mexico, but, she probably has some left wing social ideas. But it looks like her site right away. And again, it was interesting. Like that is Team Chuck Schumer, that website,
Yeah.
right? And
It's as establishment as you can get.
right. And so she's not going to rock the boat. And so you've got these forces, none of which seem to want to rock the boat. And yeah, New Mexico is a place that young people want to leave. And that's interesting too. I'm not saying it's a bad
Yeah.
thing that they haven't had these forces. I'm not saying at all anything like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
My God, keep me away from Mamdani. In a lot of ways, politics like that. But it's just interesting, and I'm just saying this strictly as an observer, as an analyst. It's interesting that a state that is not in, New Mexico's doing fine. Probably, if you take a look at New Mexico history, it's probably developing relatively like in line with its state history pretty well. I don't know. Yet there's no real radical forces going on, and that's really interesting. Whereas if you take a look at even Arizona, there's MAGA's obviously is a huge force here.
Yeah.
And again, I'm saying, it's not intended to say that it's too bad New Mexico doesn't have this, or it's too bad Arizona does. That's not the point of the comment. It's merely an
Of
observation.
course, yeah.
And huh. I don't
I don't know if I have an answer because
know.
it's
Yeah.
like I lived there most of my life. I get like the only thing, and maybe it's one of those questions which you just leave open, just leave it to open, but I think we just need to go back to the start, and I think it's just like you remember how we were talking about how New Mexico kind of has that like mystique,
Yeah.
that mystery. Where does it get that from? They get it from New Mexico gets it from like the people. Like I'm gonna take the anthropological approach, and it's just like it's unlike any other country racially. I mean any other state racially. It's geography. I mean, yeah, sure, there's other places that have like mountains and stuff like that, but like the history's older than a lot of other. I don't know. I don't even know if I can answer that, but I guess any answer I would try and give, it's just because the New Mexican people are so interconnected with one another. Like
Interesting.
everyone knows each other.
Interesting. Yeah.
Everyone
It's a
knows
small
each other.
state,
And I
right?
guess it's a small state, and I think the reason why a lot of radicalism happens, and this is just my own personal take, why it happens in a lot of other states, just kind of like a breakdown in like community, family, like family, and like interpersonal relations with one another. And while there is that issue in New Mexico with like drugs, of course, are a massive thing, man, I tell you, I have been adopted by so many Hispanic grandmas. I have like five different abuelas now, basically. It's just like, but like the family, even though there's like all these issues like drugs and education, people going to prison, all that, man, I'm telling you, family, it's like the level of love people have for their families, like kind of like the stereotype of like people in foreign countries
Mm.
have like they're like, oh, I love my family. Like it's a dynamic I've never really seen in any other state, that focus on family, and it comes across both parties. That's the only thing I could see
You
stemming
know
from
what?
it.
This is if you can avoid the drug trend,
Yeah,
right? There's obviously a class of people that kind of fall into that drug trap, right? That
yeah,
cycle of whether it's addiction, crime. assuming, but if you don't fall into that trap, the communities are very strong, maybe. They're just
Yeah,
really, really strong.
yeah.
And
That's ex
that what you've done, I think, is you've placed the answer in Tocqueville.
like little platoons,
Well, not
or
no, but just the notion of community. Yeah. Well,
yeah,
little platoons with Burke, but the notion of community, that like it's the fact that it's family and communities, and that's this anti-radicalizing like presence. And
that
again,
might be it.
and it's not to suggest, and again, by no point am I suggesting that it's that left-wing populism or MAGA isn't a good thing or anything like that. I mean, it might be for whatever you might be listening, and I could, but it's just interesting that New Mexico doesn't have that. And what tends to breed it on the right is people who think the left are out to get them. And what tends to breed it on the left is the people who think the right is out to get them.
Yeah.
But if you have strong communities that bridge that, you maybe don't think the worst of the other side.
Maybe it's
And then also the power of the marijuana industry that might also be part of this answer too.
maybe, but then again, Colorado's also like they're. I mean, they're known as the mile high state for two
Yeah.
reasons, and they got some stuff
But
going
they've
on.
got
But
lots
it's
of radical
like
politics in Colorado on both
they've
sides.
got lots of radical politics. Yeah.
And it's fascinating that New Mexico's anyway. I mean, I love that provisional answer. We'll clearly have to explore that in a future episode. Andrew, I don't want
Of
to take up
course,
any
yeah.
of your time. You got a long drive back tonight. So we'll leave it there. But Andrew, that was a fascinating discussion. Thank you very much.
Hey, no problem. And I love talking about my home state. And hey, I hope to whoever's watching, I know I just mentioned all the different problems about New Mexico, but like, give it a visit. It's a beautiful state, genuinely.
Well, I'm gonna,
That's all I
you
have
know
to
what?
say.
I intend to take my family on a road trip there this summer. So, but
Beautiful,
yeah,
amazing. Check out Santa Fe. But that's all I gotta say. But yeah,
very good.
thank you. And I'll see you another time, Rob.